everything was great with him. The other owner was like, laughed at me and says, "You're not going to make it." He said, "You can't make any money on a coffee shop."
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. And that drives me.
Ooh.
You tell me I can't do something or I can't be successful, then I'm going to do everything in my power to be successful.
Love that.
What's up, everybody? My name is Adam, and I'm the host of the UKnowAdamTsang podcast, the show that is dedicated on bringing on passionate people, learning about their stories, and delivering value to entrepreneurs. So if that's what you're interested in, go ahead and follow, like, and subscribe. You know what I'm saying?
How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the UKnowAdamTsang podcast, where you get to know a little bit more about people, passions, and all things business. Today, sitting across the way is Mr. David Hoyle of Cool Beanz in Statesboro, Georgia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, tell me a little bit about Cool Beanz. I know Cool Beanz just because I go to the shop. It is one of my favorite places to go for coffee. But you are the entrepreneur that's behind that business.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So for me, it's went to college here in Statesboro back in the 80s, graduated, got a real job, real life.
Real job?
Yes.
What were you doing before?
So I was had several jobs coming out of school, just like everybody out of Statesboro. Went to Atlanta, had a job as an auditor for actually Aaron. It's Aaron Sales now, or Aaron Rent to Own now. It used to be just Aaron Rents.
Okay.
And I was in their corporate office. And the reason I took the job, I was able to travel around the country. So it was like I was in a different city every other day.
And how was that?
I loved it for a year and a half.
Yeah?
But because I was just out of school, I was young.
Yeah.
I was like, sowing my oats, and it was like just seeing the country, and had never, I traveled, but not like that.
Yeah. So favorite place that you went to during that period of time, that year and a half?
Probably New Mexico.
Yeah.
I was in Tucson, and I just remember, and this is going to sound silly, but I had my first breakfast taco.
Okay.
And a guy in a truck pulled up to where we were doing our inventory and the auditing. And I'm like, I've never had a breakfast taco.
Sure.
And I was like, oh my God, this is
Blown
amazing.
away, huh?
It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful country out there. Just
very dry.
It is, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
Love
it's
it.
beautiful out there.
Love it. So you did that for a year and a half, and then what kind of like
Well, so I got
transpired?
tired of traveling.
Okay. Sure.
So I went into the corporate office for a year, and we developed the position I had changed, and so I worked with the corporate leaders to create this new position, and then we hired everybody, and I trained them. So I still travel, but not as much, and I had control of my travel.
Love that.
So it wasn't bad. So I did that for about it was probably another year and a half, and just some things were going on internally with the business that I didn't feel comfortable with, and so I just kind of like, okay, I'm going to step away. And so I quit.
Yeah.
And didn't have anything lined up. You know that story. It's like you got to make sure you have something lined up.
Okay.
That's true. I didn't do it, so I was waiting tables. Because that's what I did through college. Is I waited tables. So I went and got a job at a Bennigan's, and this again was back in the early '90s. So I did that for probably 6 months, and then one morning, as I was walking out of a poker game, I realized it was 6 o'clock in the morning. It's like, I'm too old for this. I got to get a real job again. So it was like, all right. So then I came back to Statesboro. Actually, I was visiting my brother, and there's a Freedman Jewelers in the Statesboro Mall. So I went in, never been in a jewelry store.
Okay.
Except to get a battery changed on a watch.
Gotcha.
And they're like, yes, we're looking for salespeople. Would you be interested as a manager training? I was like, yeah, it's a job. I need a job.
Sure.
So I took it and turned into my career. Was trained here for about a year and a half, and then got my first store in Myrtle Beach.
Okay.
So I was in Myrtle Beach, and then they moved me to Savannah Mall, and then I moved up to Statesboro. And this, believe it or not, the Statesboro Mall, we had 750 stores all across the country, from Georgia to California. Statesboro Mall was the #1 volume store in the company.
How is that possible? So for those listeners that don't know about the Statesboro Mall, we call it the Small for short. It is literally a tiny, tiny mall, but you're saying that it has the #1 Freedman jeweler.
It did, yes.
Oh, okay.
So they've liquidated.
Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, so there's a lot of money a lot of farming, a lot of old money in the Statesboro area. And where we're located, you have to drive an hour and a half to Augusta, an hour to Savannah, Macon. And so everybody would come to Statesboro. And even it was a small, poopy mall back then. It was bad. But we were a destination there. And and Freeman's had been there since the 60s.
Sure.
And the previous managers had all built the business up. I can remember as a trainee there, the first time I sold a 1 carat diamond ring, it was only $5,000 back then. But the guy came in and had just come in off the farm. He would track mud in the store. My manager was mad because he literally got mud on the floor, on the carpet.
Yeah.
And she was like, David, you need to tell him he needs to go clean his boots. And I said, I'm trying to sell a ring.
Let me make the sale first.
I know, yeah. But he just wrote me a check.
Yeah.
It was like $5,000 plus tax.
Wow. What was commission back then?
It was, holy cow, 1%.
Okay.
So, I mean, it wasn't a lot. But it was still good.
Yeah.
And as a salesperson, it was.
Sure.
I mean, once you got into management, that's when we really started making money.
Got you.
Because we did all our own collections. And so you get a percentage of everything went in the bank.
Wow.
And that's where you really started making money in the industry.
As a manager.
Yeah, as a manager. But yeah, so I did that, for a year and a half. And then, like I said, they moved to Savannah and then Hinesville back here. And then had... I'm not going to say a falling out, just, I'm hard-headed. I know how things should be done.
Got you.
My VP had different ideas, and so we just had a parting of the ways. And so,
what was the biggest lesson that you learned while you were working jewelry?
Customer service.
Okay.
100%. And developing relationships.
Okay.
And that's helped me throughout my life. But Freeman's model, so they weren't fancy like Windsor Jewelers or Tiffany and Company. It was our customer base was Walmart customers. So they didn't have a lot of money. We did credit. And so to credit, I as a manager had the opportunity or the ability to say, okay, Adam, let me see your credit report, where you work. Okay, I'm going to give you credit.
Sure.
Which is great if you're trained properly because I had to collect it.
Yeah.
So if you didn't pay me, I had to go knock on your door.
Yeah? Did you ever have to do
that?
Oh,
yeah.
You did?
Yeah. It wasn't fun.
Uh-huh.
I've got great stories about things that have happened. But it's because I developed a relationship with you, you're like, oh, David, this is what I got or this is what happened, and I'll work with you.
Sure.
And that's what I just tell people, just talk to me, let me know what's going on, and I'll do everything I can to help you out. I mean, I had customers that would file bankruptcy, and they would come and say to me, hey, because you took a chance on me, I'm not putting you in my bankruptcy. I want to keep paying you.
Got you.
And they did.
This is fascinating to me because you are identifying, even at this stage, you're identifying risk.
Right.
Right, at a high level, because you have to say like whether or not this person is going to pay or not. How do you do that? Is it a feeling?
Well, okay, technically it's not supposed to be.
Okay.
But
the wiggle, there's some gray area.
There is gray area. So I would run your credit report. I would look at your job, your stability, where you're from. In this small community, if I knew your family or anybody in your family, that makes a difference too. But I would say, okay, I'd have models to use. And it might be, okay, so you're just out of college, and you want to get a $5,000 ring. And it's like, well, your credit's only going to really give you $1,000. I said, let's start with that and then build our way up.
Sure.
And that's how you build relationships. But also, too, if you were iffy, like let's say that you had a bad, it didn't pay your credit cards in college.
Sure.
So your credit was bad. You had a low beacon score.
History. Yeah.
And so I could pull it up and look at it and I say, man, I'm not supposed to open you. But if I liked you and I could tell you had that's where the feeling came in. I said, you know what? I'll take a chance. I'll give you $500.
Sure.
And there's always that calculated risk on how much credit that I could give you. The problem that the company ran into is that I was trained properly. So I didn't have a problem. I can take a chance on you, but I knew, and you knew, that I would come knock on your door.
Sure.
But with the newer managers, as we started growing and expanding, newer managers weren't trained that way.
Gotcha.
And nobody wants to collect.
Sure.
Most people don't want to collect.
So you had more money out.
Yeah. So, and my bonuses were dependent on my sales.
Got you.
So if I needed sales, it's like, okay, you breathing?
Yeah.
Here, let me give you credit.
Got you. Understood.
And so because that happened so much, they ran into a problem with delinquencies and what they were reporting, and then they went public and had to report to the SEC and a lot of falseness.
Yeah.
So what happened was the CEO spent 12 years in prison.
Wow.
For lying to the DOJ.
Oh wow.
So it was an interesting time.
Yeah.
And then so I was here in Statesboro when I left. That corporate office actually called me and said, "Hey, we've got a new chief merchandiser. They're looking for somebody from the field."
Yeah.
And so I was unemployed for a month, and then I went back to Savannah. They're based in Savannah, and started working in the corporate office at Freeman. Still.
Okay.
So yeah, they hired me back.
So how do I get to coffee?
Well,
Right?
so we're not even there. We're still like
Yeah.
probably 10 years away from coffee.
Okay. So what happens next?
So stay with Freeman, then finally a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. The company was put into bankruptcy. Hedge funds were playing with the company.
Gotcha.
And they ended up the very last bankruptcy. We thought they were going to buy us back out, but they ended up getting sold to a liquidator.
Gotcha.
So we liquidated. And I remember that because I'd moved back into operations. I was the director of operations, working with the 4 regional VPs. We were trying to build the company, had a plan, and then they said, we're shutting everything down. And at the very end, I remembered it was myself and the VP of HR. We let go, I think that day, I'll never forget it. It was April 5th, 2008. And it was probably 60 people.
Wow.
I let them go. Now, everybody knew what was coming, so it wasn't as bad, but it was a tough day for me.
Yeah.
And so when I was done,
these were all like relationships that you
all
had
people
built
I knew
all over time, right?
Yeah, that they knew me, I knew them.
How those conversations go? Was there? I guess there was something called severance.
There was. We had severance
okay.
package. So, but they knew that was part of it. But as in any corporation, they were trying to keep everything secret until the end because you don't want people stealing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. You know, and you don't want people quitting because the bankruptcy, they still need to get as most money as they can during the bankruptcy sale. But yeah, so I told my guys this is coming. I had a team of 12 in the corporate office, and then worked with all the district, what do we call them, senior partners. Sure. And when it came time, I would call them up and say, "Hey, this is David. So I know this isn't a surprise, but this is what's going on. This is what's happening. We're gonna have to let you go. Here's your severance package." And I would listen to them. Most of them were, "Yeah, we knew it was coming." They've already had jobs lined up, and a couple of them were very upset. Like some of the newer supervisors, you know. And it was tough. But I felt them as like, "Hey, I'm in your shoes. I've been there, and I'm going through the same thing too." And I got through almost all of my supervisors. And then the chief legal counsel came in and was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, HR, it was one of the other HR directors. She told me to let all the supervisors go." And he's like, "No, who's going to run the stores? Because we've got to do the liquidation sale." And I was like, "Well, I mean, I've got 3 people left on my list. What do you want me to do?" "Well, you need to call people and see." And I said, "No, you're kidding, right?" And he's like, "No, we need 5 people."
Oh, my God.
So
you needed 2 more.
Well, I know I had to find 5 more people to stay.
Okay.
So the ones that I'd call, I had the 3 left that I needed to call.
Okay.
And they're like, "Yeah, we'll stay," because I offered them, severance. They was like, "Here's what we offer."
Understood.
And then I'm like, well, now I got to call 2 people. So I was like, I had to call, and I called the ones I knew the closest. I said, "Hey, when I called you a while ago and fired you?" I was just kidding. So I was able to bring those people back on, kept them on, and then they were like, "Okay, you need to stay," because I was walking out the door. I'd already been fired. Yeah. By my VP and I fired each other.
Oh, really?
And so we were going to grab a beer, and we were out in the parking lot, and LP came and said, "Hey, David, they need to talk to you." And it's like, we don't have anybody in operations to run the field. And I was like, well, okay. So they gave me a really nice severance. Well, not nice, but they gave me a severance package. And said, "We need you to stay 90 days. Okay. I was like, okay, I'll do it. And that was probably the most stressful 3 months of my life.
Why?
Well, so every problem that the liquidators didn't want to deal with, I had to deal with. So if you were a vendor, a jewelry repairman, we owed you money. We owed you money, but we couldn't pay any money because everything had to go through the bankruptcy court. Sure. And so they're calling me and say, "Hey, what about this?" Same thing, customer complaints. Every single customer complaint came to me. It was tough because it was like every day it was something. And I had people calling because we had a lifetime diamond warranty. Well, what about my ring?
Sure.
Well, I'm sorry, we're not going to be here in 2 months. Well, I'm going to sue you. And I was like, get in line. Yeah. And I remember my last day was July 3rd. It was a Friday. And I got in my Jeep to go home, and I was like, I was just exhausted. I was spent. I ended up taking a month off and not do anything because it just was so stressful. I was able to wrangle a trip to the Cayman Islands because they were looking for a trainer. So they flew me down, one of the jewelry places there. So they flew me down for 3 days. And
still Freeman's?
No, this was a different company.
This was different company.
Yeah,
Okay.
But I was able to get a little vacation.
Yeah.
But when I came back, the liquidators called me and said, hey, if you're interested in doing this. And I was like, yeah, because I don't know what I'm going to do.
Sure.
So I did liquidation for 2 years. We liquidated service merchandise, Steve & Barry's, linens and things. So I did that for 2 years, and then had a buddy who was retired from the military doing government contracting, and he was the company they worked for was a telecom company.
Okay.
And so they said, hey, we're just looking for laborers, just pulling cables. So like these cables right here.
Sure.
We would run them, anything from the wall back is what we would install. And so I got in there, and it was like, yeah, this is easy work. So I was, and we were in San Antonio again. I was doing the work there. Something happened, and within 3 months, I was the project manager. So I ran that project.
What is allowing you to move into management so quickly? So we mentioned one of the things, which was like, obviously you care. Like, I think people should care a lot about the reputation, right? Saying what you're going to do and doing it. And then not only doing that, but being reliable, right? But then it seems like regardless of what you're doing, you just move directly as quickly to the top.
Yeah, and it's not something I do. It's just like I do my job how I best see it. And, it is really being dependable.
Sure.
If you say you're going to do something, do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not any fun because you get extra work.
Sure.
But you just kind of soldier through it. And then you get the perks that came with it. Like when I was at Freeman Jewelers towards the end, because I was always a person everybody count on, I was playing golf with the CEO and the senior leadership. We'd drive down to Hilton Head and play golf. And I was able to go on cruises, like leadership cruises and stuff like that. So it was good. I mean, it was a good company that did me really well, but that was because I gave them everything I had.
Sure.
And a lot of times doesn't get recognized. And it's tough.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I'm just slaving away doing this. Why am I not getting anything from this?
Yeah.
It's like, why should I give this company my extra time an hour? And it's, I think what is the big thing now? It's quiet quitting.
What is that?
I think it's people are just doing the minimum just to get by. It's like, why should I do something extra for them?
I think, what's interesting about this right now is we live in a day and age where even if you have just a little bit of work ethic, you will, because everybody else is just doing the bare minimum, you will rise very quickly.
Shine. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
shine. Even if it's just like, and it's crazy that it's like this right now. It's one of the questions that I talk with entrepreneurs all the time about. It's like, how do I get my team to be able to go out and achieve more, right? Before it was like, I don't know what it was like when you were like, on the come up, right? Like when you were working, but it seems so difficult right now in this day and age.
Well, it is, but as a leader, you have to lead by example.
Yep.
And it's, I like right now I have a team of 13 and they're almost all college kids.
Yep.
And I hear them talk and what their expectations are, but I can only teach them what I know.
Yep.
And that's what I tell them. It's like, if you tell me you're going to do something, do it.
Yep.
If you can't, it's okay, but you need to let me know. Don't let me expect something to be done and all of a sudden it's not.
Sure.
And one of them, I remember she graduated and she was like, I've got this job at a corporate company, but I'm only going to do, what I'm supposed to do. So 9 to 5, nothing extra. And it's like, why? What does that get you? You're just slaving away, not moving forward. You're just going to be stuck in that same spot because as they're looking for leaders or people to promote, well, no, David doesn't do anything extra. He just does the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And that's very obvious. You might not realize it, but that is very obvious to the upper management leadership. It should be. Let me put it that way.
That's right.
It's not always.
That's right.
But I always tell them, it's like, hey, this is my life experience. Let me help you guys. This is what you need to do. Same thing with anybody that graduates that works for me. I always sit down with them and say, okay, look, when you start looking for work, everything's negotiable.
Yep.
Just because they say, hey, we're going to pay you $25,000, that doesn't mean they have a range. Because as a director of recruiting, I was on the other side.
Yeah.
And so we did things that just blew my mind.
Sure.
Giving like $50,000 signing bonuses, $10,000 moving bonuses.
Yep.
I'm like, why are we doing that? So I can just hire them.
Sure.
And they're like, no, we got to give them extra money. So I tell them, you always negotiate. And let's say that there is a budget.
Sure.
And you can only make $30,000. Well, then negotiate for extra vacation time. Doesn't
I got
cost
you.
anything. Because most of the time you don't get any vacation for your first 6 months, and then maybe first year you get a year, and then after 5 years you get 2 years.
Got you.
Vacation is too important, man. You got to negotiate that and just say, hey, let me start at 3 weeks vacation.
So let's get back to you're putting wires in, right? Like
Right,
that's where
yeah.
you were at. Yeah.
So I started doing that, and then there was a couple other projects that I had to fix. And I'm really good with people. Customer service has always been my strong point, and I connect. And a lot of that really can trace back to Friedman Jewelers.
Yeah.
So it got to where upper management, like the guys in San Antonio, really liked me.
Sure.
And then that job ended. I left, and they called me 6 months later and said, hey, we got this big job in Kansas City. Would you be interested?
Sure.
And I was like, sure.
Yeah.
So I went to Kansas City. I got to, and that's where I actually got into coffee.
Okay.
Was because I was in Kansas City. So that's my prime, which is basically my boss, which was another company that hired our company. Her and I would sit in our job trailer, and we would drink Starbucks. And I said, hey, let's go try other coffee. So we started trying different coffee shops.
Like specialty.
Yeah, specialty coffee in Kansas City. And there was a place called, and I can't remember the name of it now, but they did pour-overs.
Okay.
It was the first time I did a pour-over, and it's like, man, I love this.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a big coffee drinker.
Yeah.
Until then. And I mean, I was just like everybody else. I go to Starbucks and get a triple grande soy 3-pump skinny mocha.
Okay. Okay. That's the order.
Yeah, but not anymore.
Yeah.
So I started doing pour-overs, and I was like, I'm really enjoying doing this. And so I was making my own coffee every morning, doing pour-overs. Became a coffee snob, actually.
Okay.
Well, the company also had government contracts in U.S. embassies around the world where they would run, they would have to build skiffs, they would have to run cables, they remodel. And so they sent me to Caracas, Venezuela.
Okay.
Went down there. They were building the barracks, the Marine barracks were off campus. So they wanted to take that house and just build barracks for them on campus or I forget what it's called, on the compound.
Sure.
So the locals were building everything, but they needed me to come supervise we had to pull phone lines.
The wires,
all the wires and stuff, coax. So I was able to go there, and I remember it was right around the time Chavez died. And so he was in Cuba. He was still alive, and he was in Cuba. So I was staying in a hotel, and that really is a third world country. I mean, I was in probably one of the nicest resorts in Caracas, but it still was like a 3-star resort. And the shortages, like it's worse now, but they did have shortages. In the day, like for towels, I might one day get 4 washcloths, 1 hand towel, no bath towel. Or I might get 5 bath towels. So you never really knew. And same thing with food. My first night there for dinner, I had a beer, and it was one of the local beers. It was really good. Never had it. Any of my other trips, never could get it again. They were always out. So I was in the morning eating breakfast, and I had a cup of coffee. And again, I was drinking Starbucks, so I didn't know what good coffee was. And I was like, well, this is pretty good. And then the next day they were out of milk. So I'm like, okay, so I can just put sugar in my coffee.
Sure.
And then the next day they were out of sugar and milk. So I'm like, okay, so now it's like, okay, black coffee, I need coffee. And I drank, and it was like, man, this is really good.
Yeah.
And so I tried to talk, and I don't speak Spanish.
Sure.
And they didn't speak English. That was probably one of the only, I guess, foreign countries I've gone to where they didn't like Americans.
Okay.
And it was fairly obvious.
Yeah.
They didn't go out of their way to help you. They weren't friendly. But it took me a minute, but I found out it was fresh coffee that I believe it came from Colombia, which is the next country over. But it was my first time having fresh coffee.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is really good. So at the end of that trip, I went back and flew into Houston and there was a Starbucks right by my gate. And I remember smelling that, and it was that dark, I'm going to say burnt, but just like over-roasted smell. And I was like, that doesn't even smell good.
Yeah.
So that really pushed me out. Okay, I'm going to find some good coffee.
Yeah.
In town here in Statesboro, my brother was still here. My niece sings, and somebody that sang with her at Plaid Dot, her dad was Wayne Hart, who owned La Di Da. He went out of business, and my brother called me and said, hey, this guy's got all this coffee equipment sitting in his back room of his trophy shop. He wants to sell it. So I was like, yeah, I'll talk to him. So I ended up buying.
But this is when you were still working for.
Yes, I was still working there because I was making money.
Yeah.
So I bought all his equipment, got a great deal on it, and put it in storage. And was still working in Kansas City, plugging away. But now I knew I had my back pocket.
Some coffee stuff.
Yeah, I had my equipment.
What did you have? back then?
So I had my espresso machine, which is the most expensive thing to start out with. A couple fridges.
Roaster?
No, that
No
came
roaster.
later. No, roaster came later. Yeah, roaster came later. But it was pretty much just the fridges, the espresso machine, and then other odds and ends, like a hot water heater, coffee brewer, things like that. So I had that and just put it in storage. And it's like, okay, that's here. It was, I don't even remember what day, but I remember I was sitting in a parking lot at Home Depot because I had to get some screws or something. And I'm like, I hate this. Why am I doing this? One, I'm away from my family and friends because I was in Kansas, which I love.
Were
Kansas
you burnt
City.
out?
I think I was. But I love Kansas City. I
Sure.
mean, great town, great barbecue, great coffee. And it's like, I think I'm going to do something. And I had a friend that owned, it wasn't cake then, it was Sweet Cheeks Bakery.
Yeah.
Jahela Akins. And she, every time I talked to her, she said, oh, you should come open a coffee shop. Because I had talked about it.
But at that point, had anybody tasted like your product before?
I didn't have a product.
You didn't have a product at all?
I didn't even know how to do an espresso machine. I knew how to do a pour over. That's it. And so I said, okay, I called Jahela up. I'm going to do it. I turned my notice in. And
was that a shock to everyone?
Yes, it was. And one of the owners was like, who's the guy that brought me on in the beginning, hey, good luck. I know you're going to do well. Just really gracious, And I said, I'm trying not to leave. Don't ever burn bridges when you leave. I mean, because you never know. You never know when you have to go back somewhere.
Yep.
So everything was great with him. The other owner was like, laughed at me and says, you're not going to make it. He said, you can't make any money on a coffee shop.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay. That drives me. Ooh. You tell me I can't do something or I can't be successful, then I'm going to do everything in my power to be successful.
Love that.
So, and I'm pretty sure 2 years ago, a year ago, and it wasn't pretty, but the company that we work for went out of business. So they're gone. I'm still open. I'm still running my coffee shop. So it's like, don't tell me that I can't do this when I put my mind to.
Love it.
I got everything lined up. Came to town a couple times looking for a place, couldn't figure it out. So when I told Jahela, she's like, just come inside here, come into my shop. We'll set up your little counter. And that was really a great way to do it because it kept all my initial costs very low. And so it was another day I was sitting in the Lowe's parking lot. She called me up and says, hey, I just want to let you know that I sold my business. And I'm like, what?
Why did you do that?
Yeah, it's like I've already turned my notice in.
Sure.
And I'm going to come open a coffee shop. Oh, well, you'll love the new owner. And I've talked to her and told her about you. She's excited. So I had to call up Shannon. And we had a great conversation, hit it off really good. She was starting her business. I was starting mine. And she let me put I had like a 6x8 space.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so set it up and we just both got it going.
What do you think kind of like, I guess it had burned you out at that point, like the previous job. But why did you think coffee was it?
Because I wanted to do something I enjoyed, and I wanted to do something that I owned. Working for other owners, and it's different when it's a corporation because you don't really see the owners. I mean, you see the upper levels of management,
sure.
You see your pathways, but when there's an owner and you see how they operate, and it's like, well, I can do this better, or I can do something like this,
sure.
And it's like, I think I want to try it on my own,
and
just do it. And I will say, just from my life experience, I've always had confidence that no matter what, that I'll figure something out and I'll do well at it. But yeah, so I just started, doing coffee, and it's just me and my French presses and my espresso machine, and just making coffee.
Yeah.
Did that. Started playing around with coffee to roast because there's a couple home things you can do, like a little bread machine and a torch. And I remember my epiphany on that was, I had 3 bags of coffee from my 3 suppliers, and it was an Ethiopian, and it's like, I'm just going to make each one and just try it. And there was a distinct difference in all 3, and it was the level and the quality of the roasting. And I could really taste it, and I was like, I can do this.
Sure.
So I bought a little home roaster called a Baymore. It was basically like a little toaster oven with a basket in it that spun. So did that. We brought it in for my regulars, who some of them are still coming in a couple times a week from I first opened. And I let them try it and like, man, you need to sell this. Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I started selling it, and I just gradually did away with what I was buying.
And then you just started
doing my own. Yeah. And then as my roasting grew, it started out I was roasting like on the weekend for 2 hours, and then on the weekend for 6 hours. and then all weekend from 8 to 6, Saturday and Sunday. Bought another little roaster, got back down to a couple hours, and then just grew again to where I was all weekend. That's all I was doing was roasting.
Sure.
And even during the week. So then stepped up from the Baymores to a Sauna Fresco, roasted on that for a year and a half. Got to the point, because it started out again, I'd roast for an hour and be done for the week. And then I was roasting all weekend, and I was like, this is crazy. So that's when I finally bit the bullet and bought the roaster in my shop now.
Got you.
And
so you're upgrading machines. You're
Right.
kind of like, starting to grow on that front.
yeah, and so as I roast more and more people are
Coming to the shop.
Yeah, coming to the shop. They're liking the coffee.
Are you selling your beans anywhere at this
Yeah,
point?
I've got them in my shop right now.
Yeah, besides that.
No, I had them in a local grocery store. Something happened in North Carolina. I think it was like either food poisoning or E. coli or something. So they pulled everything out, and so I just pulled it out.
Got you.
Because I was selling, but not as much as I like.
Sure.
And so I was just kind of, let me just wait.
How'd you come up with the name?
So that's a funny story. My original thought for a name was Blind Willie's.
Okay, because Statesboro. Obviously, yeah.
And so I was sitting with my brother and his wife, and I said, so I think I'm going to open the coffee shop. I'm going to call it Blind Willie's. And my sister-in-law used to always say Cool Beanz.
Yeah.
And she said Cool Beanz. And I was like, wait.
I like that one.
I was like, man, that's a good name too. So then I just went to Cool Beanz. And when I went to register the name, it was like, there's so many Cool Beans.
Yeah.
And so then I had to couldn't do Cool Beanz Coffee, Cool Beanz Cafe. So I had to do Cool Beanz Expresso Bar, which worked because I was just a bar.
Yeah.
So now we're not. Now we're a shop. But
Yeah.
it's like, might as well we'll just keep it Cool Beanz Espresso Bar.
Yeah.
So just did that.
Very nice. So you kind of like, transitioned, and you're growing at a phenomenal rate. How quickly were you kind of like having to get new machines?
It was about every 3 years on the roasters.
Gotcha.
And now the one I have it's still, I can roast everything I need for the week in 6 hours.
That's great.
So, which is perfect for me.
Yeah.
And I try to roast during the day when customers are there so I can talk to them. But normally I'll come in on, after hours in the evenings or on Sundays. That's the unseen part of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But I'll roast just so I can get it done and get it out of the way. Because if there's not anybody for me to talk to, then I can focus and I can get done a lot faster. Because I obviously like to talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now I'm on my machine. I do usually about 9 pounds a roast.
So you started in kind of like this, you said 600 square feet.
Yeah, it was
Like-
40. No, it wasn't 600. It was 480.
408.
It was a 6x8 space.
Yeah, super small.
Yes.
And then you kind of like started growing. And then now you are actually in like your own.
My own space.
Yes.
Yeah.
So talk to me about like, the journey there.
Well, so I was in the bakery and we were in there. I mean, we had a great relationship. People would come and get a cupcake or a quiche and they would get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I was roasting. The Eagle Creek Brewery let me roast in their back room. So I had my roaster set up back there. But when I got my new, expensive roaster, it was like, I need to showcase this. So I talked to the owner of the bakery and I said, hey, can I bring my roaster in? She's like, no, you don't have space for it. We can't do it. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. I said, well, I'm going to start looking for a new place. And I I said it nice. I wasn't like, oh, well, fine, I'll find someplace. But it didn't come across that way. And it's sometimes you gotta be careful, like when you're talking to people.
Sure.
I know what's in my head.
Sure.
Sometimes it come out. So apparently I didn't say it right. So she's like, well, I'm going to rebrand to a bistro. And I said, fair enough. I said, let me find a place. So I actually had something lined up. It was here.
Yeah.
Out in the front of the big business innovation group.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was like, hey, go ahead. We start setting up. Everything's going to be great. And at the very last minute, he called me up. And I was in Cleveland visiting my sister. Said, hey, just got a call from Board of Regents. Can't do it. Anything that's on campus needs to be owned by Georgia Southern.
I hate that.
And I get that. And it makes sense. And there was a guy who's going to do a sandwich shop, same boat as me.
Yeah.
It's like, we can't do it. And I said, okay, that's totally fine. And so I was like, now I got to find some place.
Yeah.
And I was in Cleveland, and I had to be out of my space by Monday. So I was like, all right, what am I going to do? Luckily, I was able to, one of my friends who's a realtor was able to hook me up with the people that own the hall. They had a back part of their rental venue that they didn't really use very often. It was maybe a changing room, or maybe they would have cocktails in there. They said, yeah, just come here, because it was short term.
Yeah.
I said, I just need something short term.
Yeah.
And so I went in, looked at it, sat down, shook hands. I said, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that was, it was interesting. That was my lease, was
Yeah.
shaking hands. And because he was an older guy,
Yep.
just like I was.
Yep.
It's like your word, your bond. I know that's not a big thing anymore, but it's like you say you're going to do something,
Yeah.
then you do it. And
Yeah.
so we kind of both agreed on that. So I stayed there short term, year and a half later.
Yeah.
Finally moved into my own place.
Were you worried about kind of, because the street visibility of your first shop was high, right?
Right.
Like it's a lot more than kind of like being on the backside. Did you experience
I was
any
scared to
sort of-
death.
Scared to death?
Scared to death. My customers, employees were like, no, these are your customers. They're going to love you. They're going to follow you wherever you go. And I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather be surprised than shocked.
Okay.
And so when we moved, it took them a minute to find us.
Sure.
And so there was a little drop in sales, but as they found us, they started coming in. Well, so we moved Labor Day 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And by November, the bistro was for sale.
Yeah.
And so, it turned out that those customers
Were
my customers. Or I was a big part of it.
And they were just coming to
get coffee, and then they were able to get other things too. And I liked the idea that I was kind of off the beaten path. You kind of had to know about me.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that whole mystique.
Yeah.
And it helped, and we were growing, picking up business. But again, it was only temporary, and I was looking for my own place. And then when that place where I'm at now opened up, I jumped on it. It was during COVID. There was a cabinet shop in there. And I knew the owner or one of the guys that ran it, and I knew his wife. They were both customers, and so I would just ask, hey, how's it going over there? And during COVID, as a cabinet shop, people couldn't go into the shop, so it was all online. And they were transitioning to online, and I knew they were paying rent, and so I knew at some point when their lease was up, they were not going to renew their lease. And so I remember
just waiting.
Yeah, I was waiting, and I was talking and putting the word out, and there were several people that helped out. And in December, I sent to the property manager. I said, hey, when this lease opens up,
I want it.
Let me know. Yeah, because I want it.
Yeah.
Well, they sent me a message back and said, hey, it's not going to open up. They're going to renew their lease. And I knew they weren't.
Yeah.
And so the next week, I got an email and said, hey, it's open up. You want to meet there? And I was like, heck yeah, let's go. Walk through it. It's like, I didn't want to seem too eager.
Sure.
Because you're always trying to get your best deal and everything.
Love it.
But it was like, I needed
This was the one.
Yeah. So they weren't supposed to be out until the end of March. So the first week of February is when I signed my lease. I was like, I want it. And nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew that they were not going to renew their lease. And when word got out, a bunch of people approached the leasing company because they wanted that space.
Sure,
and
but it's already been signed.
It's already been leased out.
Nice. So what was the transition like moving from kind of like the hall to then the space?
It was. I went from 5 tables and so 20 chairs to 43 seats.
Yeah.
And so it was a big transition. I had Lori Tiddick, who's a good friend of mine, and
she's awesome.
She is. I hired her. And she designed it.
Yeah.
And so I told her, it's like, here's what we can do. You tell me what I need. Because I didn't want to spend a ton of money buying things.
Yeah.
And so it was like, what can we thrift?
Yeah.
Because it's a big expense. And anytime you start something new or move, you have a huge outlay of cash. Well, that money's got to be paid back.
That's right.
Or it's got to come from somewhere.
That's right.
So it's like, let's do stuff on, I don't want to say on the cheap.
Yeah.
But on the low. And then Lori is so phenomenal. Like, she would take tables and chairs, paint them, redo them, and you could never tell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, wow, this is a really trendy, chic place because of her skills in decorating. Was it smooth sailing? No. Because in my mind, I knew what I wanted.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted a swing in there.
Yeah.
I wanted AstroTurf. I wanted a TV. And she never knew if I was serious. And I was.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, David. It's like, I wanted to turn into the coolest man cave ever.
That's right.
And she's like, no, because women won't come in here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And so she's like, you just let me do my thing.
Yeah.
And so I did. I was like, you just tell me what I need to pay you.
And it looks amazing in there.
She did such a phenomenal job. And so many people come in. We get compliments, every week. And it's like, man, we don't expect to see something like this in Statesboro.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so now, as a brand, you command even a larger audience because you have the space,
right?
Because you have like the ability to kind of sit there
and the visibility.
Yes.
That moving to that street, it was even before we got our sign up outside, we blew up.
Yeah.
Sales blew up. And a good part of it is I had 2 girls working for me that were just like killing it on social media.
Yeah.
And those are only 2 things I can think of is their job on social media and the visibility. I mean, everything doubled.
Yeah.
I mean, sales doubled, but then payroll doubled. I mean,
Sure.
cost, everything just, so it took me about 6 months to get a handle on everything. Actually, probably longer than that. Because, then it's like, okay, do I need to work 3 people at one time or
Sure.
do just one person? Because we had just been running one person at a time, but we can't, now we're 2 people almost all the time.
In that transitional period, what was the biggest kind of like thing that you learned?
It was being nimble, being flexible, very fluid, able to change, adjust. If all of a sudden, like my chai tea lattes, which we use a mix, whereas I only need like 5 bags every 2 weeks. All of a sudden, I'm having to order 20.
Yeah.
Same thing with roasting. Is like all this cold brew. Now,
Yeah.
cold brew is a great example. I mean,
Yeah.
we were making 15 gallons of cold brew every 2 days. All of a sudden, I said, okay, now we're making 22 gallons. And sometimes every day we were making 20 because we were just going through it so fast.
Yeah.
Now we're back down to 23 gallons every other day
Yeah.
of cold brew. But it's being very fluid. But you got to be smart because, you can't just buy, so like say syrups, like say vanilla.
Yeah.
We might have kept 5 in the shop at all times. Well, I can't just buy 50 of them.
Yeah.
Because then my inventory is tied up
That's
in
right.
50 bottles. And if you need napkins, paper towels, toilet paper,
That's right.
straw, I mean everything. And that's something I have to teach my employees is that, you walk in here and somebody spilled something, you grab a bunch of bev naps.
Yeah.
Well, that handful of bev naps costs me money.
That's right.
They don't see that. They just see it as just paper towels and just throw them away.
That's right.
But it's like every single thing in there costs me money.
Sure.
And goes against my profit. And that's, that's something I've known just throughout my career, having to be responsible for, running stores, regions, projects. And I know that my employees think, and I am cheap. I mean, you got to frugal. Frugal is the word I'm supposed to use. Sorry.
Yes, that's
I forgot. I'm supposed to use the word frugal. But like I see them wipe up something with a paper towel. I say, why don't you use the towel?
Yeah.
That's just something, that I'm always going to be that way because
Sure.
I'm looking at every single thing that we use goes against my profit.
Got you.
So,
What's the future look like?
I'm kind of going to wait and see what the economy's doing.
Sure.
Because it's always scary. You're never sure what step to take.
Uh-huh.
But probably next year we'll start exploring going full-time into wholesale and second location. I've opened a second location before.
Sure.
And that's when I had only been open for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very leery about doing that. And it would have to be out of town.
Sure.
Because the last one I was in town, and what I had found was, so again, my personality and my ability to connect with people is what helped grow my business. So when I had 2 shops, wherever I was, that's where everybody would go.
Got you.
And when I did a test, and it was January, had been open 4 months. So it had been open 5 months. January I spent at the other location, did great. But then my main location, this one here on Main Street, started dropping.
Sure.
And sales dropped. So I was like, okay. So February, I was like, hey, I'm going to stay here on Main Street and see what the other shop does. Well, it did. And so, I mean, I closed February 16th. I didn't even make it through the entire month.
Yeah.
Because I could see what was happening.
Sure.
I was like, I'm dry. It's dragging me down. It's pulling the profits from this shop to run the other one.
That's right.
And that's one of the things I said I would never do.
Sure.
So I was like, I talked to the owner of the floor shop I was in. I was
Yep.
like, hey, this is not working out for me. It's a great space and it had a great opportunity. And it felt like when I first started out. But at that point, it was like I had a bunch of costs that I didn't have when I first started out. And it's like, I can't do it. So I was able to sell all my equipment, break even. The only loss I had was the payroll I paid. But that was, and I told her that was always, we were going to see for 6 months, see what happens, and was able to pull out.
Yeah. So, my channel is really meant for entrepreneurs, people that are interested in, whatever business it is. From your experience, what would you be willing to impart in terms of knowledge for them?
Well, a lot of it is find something you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be something you love, but it's something you're passionate about. that you can monetize. You know, you could be passionate about collecting butterflies, but you're not going to make any money doing that. Maybe, I don't know, you can press them and put them on glass and make mobiles.
You don't know now.
I know, that's true. You know, but if you can figure out a way to make money from it, then that's what should be your business. Because if you're not passionate, then it's just a job. The other thing I would say is before you get into a business, make sure you're aware of everything you're going to have to lay out the first year. You know, like I think what caught me, because again, I know there's a certain method you're supposed to use when you start a business, and I was just like, I'm going to start a coffee shop. Was taxes, fees, and dues. If I had known what I had to pay, I have to pay every January, I was like, dang, I'm not going to do this. Same thing, payroll. I didn't know you had to pay payroll taxes. That, you know, it's like now I do that every week, and I'm like, oh my, or every month, and I'm like, dang, I hate doing this stuff. But yeah, so do that, and then if you can figure out a way to use somebody else's money without giving up ownership or giving up minimal ownership of your business and control, like I wouldn't give up any control of my business if somebody gave me money because it's still my vision. You know, at some point I'll step away, and then whoever wants can do whatever they want with it. But in the meantime, I have to have all the say.
That's right.
And that's hard. It's hard to find. You've got to find those angel investors, somebody that will believe in what you do and let you do your thing.
That's right.
But it's easier with other people's money.
That's right.
Because I never had anybody's money. It was all whatever I scrounged together, whatever I saved, whatever I traded for in order to grow my business every time.
That's right. Well, David, I have to say that your story is an inspirational one. I didn't realize that it was that deep, that you had, you know, that much experience, but I can see how every step along the way has poured into this moment in time where you are at Cool Beanz and serving a phenomenal product.
Well, thank you.
So I appreciate everything that you've done for the community, and then excited for everything that you're planning to do for the future.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's the show.
All right. Thank you, man.